How's it going, everyone? It's Milmonkey coming back at you once again, and today we're going to be discussing Star Wars: The High Republic Into the Dark by Claudia Gray. Let's get into it. Four Jedi charter a ship known as the Vessel to transport them to Starlight Beacon. On the way, hyperspace becomes untraversable, and the crew are forced to take refuge on an abandoned space station with a secret rooted in the dark side. All right, let's take a moment here to look at the cover art of the book. Cover art done by Giorgio Baroni depicts character Reese Silas and Affie Hollow on the Amaxian station, of course. You got to appreciate when the cover artist takes a scene right out of the book and depicts it on the cover. It's a nice touch. And look, Affie even has a thermal detonator, which she uses in the book. You got to love it, right? One of the better covers thus far. From this point forward, I'll be delving into spoilers for the book, so if you don't want to be spoiled, skip ahead to the end. Let's talk characters. Starting off with our main protagonist of the book, we got Reese Silas, who's a Jedi who would rather just stay back at the Jedi Temple in Coruscant in the archives. I mean, this guy literally wants to be the next archivist. He just can't get enough. He doesn't want to be out there on the frontier. He doesn't want to go to Starlight Beacon. The guy's a nerd, and he'd rather just stay put. But his master has other plans for him, much to his chagrin, right? Then we got another former apprentice of Jedi Master Jora Malli, Des Rydan. He's hitching a ride to Starlight Beacon as well, along with the Umbaran Jedi Wayseeker, Orla Jareni. And of course, we got the Jedi Mystic, Cohmac Vitus, right? He's heading to Starlight Beacon as well for the opening ceremony. The ship they're taking, known as the Vessel, is captained by Captain Leox Gyasi, who Claudia Gray described as a Matthew McConaughey type in space. And she nails it. And the Vessel is co-piloted by Affie Hollow, who is the adopted daughter of the Bind Guild leader, Scover. So, pretty high-ranking ship here. And of course, the ship is navigated by the one, the only, Geode, right? Everybody's favorite. We all remember when he was debuted on the High Republic show, Geode the Rock. He's here. And he's a scene stealer, what can I say? Yeah, so this story is kind of like a simple premise. For Jedi on their way to the Starlight Beacon opening ceremony, they charter a ship. On the way to the ceremony, they have to drop out of hyperspace unexpectedly because hyperspace becomes unstable because of the great hyperspace disaster. So they're stranded, right? But it's not just them. There's a whole bunch of other people that just happen to be using hyperspace right then and there at the same time, not crashing into each other, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So they all take refuge, right, on this conveniently placed abandoned space station. And while they're exploring the space station, right, they discover, hey, there's a lot of treasure. There's a lot of stuff here, but mostly there's poisonous plants, right? And if you get nicked by the poisonous plants, you got to immediately take an antidote or you're going to die. So, there's a lot of infighting, and the Jedi are trying to keep order. And there's like some mysteries going on with one of the characters. They end up disappearing, thought dead, but of course. But again, not everybody is as they seem. Some of the characters turn out to be Nihil, right? So when hyperspace is allowed to be flown again, and the Jedi leave, the Nihil characters lead the Nihil to the space station so they can, take advantage of all the treasures there. But the Jedi realize they make a mistake because they undid this dark side spell that held these statues in place, right? They were so focused on the statues, they didn't even realize what the statues were containing. And when they get back to the space station, they realize, we've unleashed the Drengir on the galaxy. And the Drengir, they're not going down without a fight. They've been frozen for who knows how long. And they're hungry, right? They want the meat. So they start eating the Nihil, and they try to eat the Jedi, and they're trying to escape the space station. And the Nihil, they're fighting the Jedi, right? There's a little war going on there. So it's all going down on the Amaxian station. And of course, the only way to defeat them all is to, blow them out the airlock, right? And that's how the Drengir, they spread through space because the Jedi, again, think they know the best. They undid the spell, and now they let the seeds fly out into space, and of course they don't die, and they go on to seed hundreds of planets, and oopsie, As for one of the positives of the book, the setting, the Amaxine station, right? Abandoned in the middle of space, overgrown with this plant life, full of treasure, is being used, as a smuggler's base where they're writing in codes on the wall. Pretty creepy, cool setting. As part of this Amaxine race that disappeared, and it was like a mystery, like what happened to them. They're apparently these great warriors, and they were like defeated and killed, wiped out. And of course, over the course of the book, we learn that they have this one-way hyperspace pod to the Drengir homeworld, and the Drengir, I guess, ate them all, right? That's the implication. And then the Sith somehow stumbled upon the station and the Drengir and put them in the stasis and locked them down, and that was that, right? But as far as setting, the characters, they get dropped out of hyperspace, they're stranded. A little convenient that the station's there, but once they get on there, things start rolling, and like I said, pretty good. Another positive for the book is I like how the characters are struggling with the dark side oppression of the Amaxine space station, right? At first we didn't know what it was, what's going on. And then we learned about, the Sith history there, and then the putting the statues, right? Those statues with the stasis, and then we start thinking, we learn about the Drengir, right? Like, are the Drengir themselves of the dark side? Are they the dark presence, or is it the Sith spell that was the dark presence? But either way, the characters, they're having dark visions. They're struggling with it. In particular, Master Cohmac, I thought he was going to flat out go to the dark side. It ends up not being the case. But, again, it just made for a good read. Claudia Gray knows what she's doing with this book, and I like to see it. Also, I want to point out, it's nice to see that we have, a diverse group of Jedi here with different ways of thinking, right? They're chafing against the Order. One leaves to become a way seeker. The other one, he feels too confined and too restricted by the dogmatic views of the Jedi Order, right? He feels confined. Then we got Reath. He just wants to learn more about the Jedi Order. He wants to be the archivist, right? And they're all trying to solve this problem on the space station, coming at it from different angles, right? It's not everybody's in lockstep, following the leader. Again, it's refreshing. And I think that's one of the strengths thus far of the High Republic era, is seeing all these different points of views, these different characters from these different ways of life. It's just enjoyable. What else can I say about that, right? It's not always got to be the same. One of the biggest problems I had with the book was the fact that Claudia Gray would keep setting up, scenarios for the characters to be in peril or in trouble or like life-threatening things, just for a couple of paragraphs for her to come along and solve the problem. Case in point being when the characters first get dropped out of hyperspace, they're checking the space around them. There's a whole bunch of ships around them. They're trying to get their bearings where they're at. And they find out, oh no, there's a solar flare coming and it's going to wipe us all out. And they're like, oh no, what do we do? Well, then they scan and they're like, oh look, there's a space station conveniently right over there that happens to have shielding that will protect us all from the solar flare. So of course they all gather up their ships and they fly over to the other side of the space station, and they're all safe and sound, right? And this happens, throughout the book a lot. There's another time when the character is doing a repair on the ship, and she's holding like this cold rod and it's like freezing her hands, like giving her frostbite. Her arms are dead. They're gone. She should die. But no, they put a little medicine on her and she's, fine. And it's just like this fake drama. Happens again over and over throughout the book. I don't know. Didn't sit right with me. Wasn't really concerned for the characters or their safety. Fake drama. Another scenario in the book that I was left scratching my head at is, on the space station, there's the Jedi, but it's also a bunch of like pirates and stuff. Everybody who got stranded in hyperspace, they all come to the space station, right? So of course they're looting and they're pillaging and they're even attempting rapes, right? Which the Jedi prevent. And as punishment to all these pirates, the Jedi say, hey, you guys got to get off the space station until you learn, to act correct, right? We're the Jedi, we're the law. You obey us, right? And so all the pirates, they grumble about it and they're like, whatever. They get on their ships and they just obey orders, right? Well, I'm sitting here thinking, if I'm the pirates, we're here in space, we're in our spaceships, why don't we just detach from the airlock, shoot the Jedi ships, blow them up, leave them stranded on the space station? I mean, what are they going to do? I mean, it's just a crazy scene. That why are these pirates just obeying they're supposed to be like bad guys. And now the Jedi, they're at a disadvantage because they're stranded on the space station. Who has the leverage? Who has the guns? They start blowing up their ships. The Jedi aren't going to be able to retaliate in time, and they're just going to be stranded. Now the pirates are going to have the upper hand. It was just one of those scenes where it's like, what's going on? One thing that I've never seen before in Star Wars is hyperspace escape pods or whatever, because here on the Amaxine station, down in the bowels of the ship, or not the ship, down in the bowels of the station, there's this like one-way hyperspace pod that travels to apparently the home planet of the Drengir and only the home planet of the Drengir and the Amaxine station back and forth. Never seen anything like that before. It was kind of crazy. Kind of convenient also, right? I don't know how you guys felt about that, but I wasn't a big fan. Played its part in the story, the whole Des Rydan death fake out and, Reath going down there, finding out that, hey, it's actually a transport and going down to the Drengir world and talking his way off the planet, saving Des, whatever. I've never seen this technology before in Star Wars. Never seen it again, and I wonder, like, why they don't explain it. Like, why is it hooked up to this specific station, to that planet? It doesn't really make sense to me. I don't know. What do you guys make of it? What are your thoughts? Want to take a moment here to talk about the Drengir themselves. As cool as an idea as I think they are, living force plant beings that are unstoppable, right? Because you just cut them down and they just two pop up. The way they're depicted, always saying, meat, 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 they want to eat. I get it, they're hungry, but I don't know, it's not scary. Is it supposed to be funny? Because it comes off as a little bit funny, right? You want to take these villains seriously. They seem to be a threat, a huge threat, an insurmountable threat, so much so that the Sith had to put them in stasis because they couldn't be defeated and strand them on this space station. But just how they act, right? It's just, I'm having trouble taking them seriously, right? Is anybody else in that boat as well? Hopefully they get depicted better in the future. But for this first introduction, just the really only concern with them was the sheer insurmountable number of them on the space station. Because remember, the space station was overgrown with plant life, and it turns out that all the plant life, or at least most of it, was the Drengir. But then it calls into question, why were those maintenance droids like taking care of the plants? You know what? There's a lot of questions now that I'm thinking about it with this book. Anyway, yeah, the Drengir, kind of a cool threat, something I've never seen before in Star Wars. We'll see how it gets handled, but I hope they develop more of like a personality or something, because this mindless meat, it's just not doing it for me. Another thing I had a problem with in this book is Affie Hollow and her dissolution of the Bind Guild at the end of the book, turning over Skover to the Republic, just because Skover was utilizing indentured slaves, as workers for the Bind Guild. Look, I get it. Slavery's bad. No one's a fan of slavery. But we got to remember that this is Star Wars. A lot of these characters, they don't have nothing. They take on this debt of indentured servitude so they can be provided with an opportunity to provide for themselves, and their family, right? It's not perfect, but it's not unheard of, right? Maybe they're provided with a ship. They're given steady work, steady pay. Yeah, they have to sign their life over for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. But what's the alternative? Die? And here comes, this kid who, who was the chosen one of the leader of the Bind Guild, right? Skover adopts her as her adopted daughter, and she's gonna hand over the Bind Guild to her one day. But Skover finds out that her parents died on the Amaxine station because, as we all know, people would take on dangerous missions to get time shaved off of their sentence, right? Makes sense. And so she's all upset at Skover, but I'm not even sure if her parents are even dead. We may find out later that they're actually alive, just like how we found out Des Rydan was still alive, but whatever. So she goes to the Republic, right, and she blows up Skover's whole operation, and the Bind Guild is dissolved. And, everybody suffers except for Affie, right? Because the Republic, they just happen to say, oh, Affie, here's this ship, the vessel. She's granted the vessel. And then Affie's like, oh, well, I need a captain for this vessel. So she gives Leox the job. And, of course, she keeps Geode on as a navigator. So the good guys all win, right? And slavery is ended in Star Wars forever, right? No, wrong. It's not. It's just in the Bind Guild. And I understand what Claudia was saying, slavery's bad, blah, blah, blah. But I'm just sitting here reading this book going like, damn, this fucking kid is blowing up this operation. Has she no loyalty to Scover? What's going on? We don't know Leox's story. Perhaps he's in indentured servitude. What about Geode, right? He's a rock. What is he doing there? We don't know his story. Perhaps Affy going into business for herself like this could have ramifications not just for Leox or Geode or the Bind Guild or Scover, but, countless other beings. The Bind Guild's trying to break into the Republic, and now she just blew all that up. How many people were counting on that job? Sure, they indentured servitude, bad, I get it. But just the whole anti-slavery message, in the book, felt a little forced and a little misguided. I don't know, I'm probably the only person to think of this. But I was like, I just don't like children characters, whatever. Another negative that I want to point out about the book is early on in the book when all the characters, they get off their ships and they first start getting onto the Amaxine station and they start like going through all the treasures and they're exploring, chaos erupts, fighting breaks out, this group doesn't like that group and these people don't get along with that group, and it's like, so the Jedi, they're trying to keep the peace, right? And they can't do it because no one's taking the Jedi seriously at first. So Master Cohmac Vitus, he gets this bright idea. He goes up, to like the second level or whatever. He jumps off and he starts floating down and he starts yelling, hey, look at me. I'm Cohmac and I'm floating. And everybody stops what they're doing. They stop their looting to look in awe at this floating Cohmac, Vitus, the Jedi Master or whatever. And it's just another example of these Jedi floating around. Like, what is it with these Jedi in this era? Always floating. But by far, my biggest disappointment with this book has to be Reath Silas's reaction to learning that his Jedi Master, Jora Malli, has died. Now, we, the reader, knew that she died back in Light of the Jedi. That was one of the big deaths of the book, if you want to consider it a big death, considering she was a brand new character that we didn't care about. But she died nonetheless, right? So in this book, that takes place during and a little bit after Light of the Jedi, right? Because all these High Republic things are stacked on top of each other. I don't know why they decided to do it like that. But we knew the whole time she was dead. In this whole book, Reath was lamenting the fact that he had to go to Starlight Beacon. All he wanted to do was stay on Coruscant, in the archives, and read about the history of the Jedi, right? But no, he has to go out there, onto the frontier, and learn what it is to be a Jedi, right? Because his Jedi Master wants him to do that. So he's complaining the whole time. But we, the reader, we knew. And we knew eventually he was going to find out. And I was wondering, what is it going to happen, right? He's stuck on this space station with all this dark side energy, right? It's affecting all the other Jedi. They're having dark visions. Oh, this is going to be great. He's going to snap when he finds out his master has died. And then he finds out, and he effectively does nothing, right? And they're already talking about, hey, choose a new master, Reath. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. His master just died. You're just passing Padawans around like this? I mean, imagine if Anakin had died. You think Obi-Wan would take a Padawan right away? No. And it was just such a, not really a build-up. It was a build-up in my mind. I was excited to see what would happen when Reath finally found out. But when he finds out, he just does a couple of meditations and ends up with a new master by the end of the book. And life goes on. Yeah, so like I said, that to me was the biggest disappointment. I was anticipating it the whole book. And when he finally found out, it was just like, whatever. My master's dead. Whatever. But he, like I said, he get a new master, and it's Cohmac Vitus. There's like two peas in a pie, Cohmac being the mystic, and Reath being the bookworm. Looking forward to seeing where that, I guess, master and apprenticeship goes. But I guess nobody cared about Jora Malli. Two of her apprentices found out that she had died in this book, and they were just like, they couldn't be bothered. Like, who cares? I touched on it in my Light of the Jedi review. Hyperspace. You don't really want to be thinking about it. In this book, a lot of characters get stranded in hyperspace because hyperspace becomes, you can't travel it, it's unstable, whatever, the hyperspace disaster. We all know the Legacy Run, which now we know is a Bind Guild ship. That is one thing I will say. I like how they keep adding little nuggets of information every story. Because before I didn't know it was a Bind Guild ship, or maybe I didn't understand the significance of the Bind Guild if it was mentioned But now that I know, it just adds to it. But the point I'm trying to make is like all these ships come out of hyperspace at the same time, right? Because they get the message, get out of hyperspace or whatever. And it's like a big traffic jam in space, right? There's all these ships surrounding each other, and yet none of them crash in hyperspace. Again, this is what I was talking about, in Light of the Jedi. You don't want to think about it because they're trying to describe hyperspace as though it's your regular Earth traffic, right? Cars in each lane going back and forth, crisscrossing, and all this stuff. And yet somehow they never crash. Everything's perfect until this moment when the Legacy Run disaster happens. And when, the vessel comes out of hyperspace and they're surrounded by all these ships, I'm just like, oh my God, man, come on. The only time I could think about ships being depicted in hyperspace, seeing each other, is in The Mandalorian, right? When Mando and Grogu, they're flying one way, and you got the space whale flying the other direction, and Grogu looks over and he sees the space whale. But you can sort of write that off as like some Force stuff, like maybe Grogu doesn't see the whale, but he could sense the whale. And I think that's the whale that Ahsoka was on anyway, so he senses their presence over there. But for all we know, they could be at opposite sides of the galaxy, yet they're depicted right there next to each other, right? Stop trying to describe hyperspace. It just takes me out of the story. And I can't be the only one, right? When there was this fleet of ships all surrounded in hyperspace, they were, I guess, traveling the same direction at the same time, in the same space, passing by a random space station in the middle of a solar flare. Like, wouldn't that solar flare have taken them out if they were in hyperspace? It just would have cooked them anyway. Like, see what I mean when you think about stuff? Let's keep it moving. Also, this book has like a B plot or whatever that takes place 25 years in the future, where 4 Jedi are sent to rescue these rival royals that are on different planets that have been captured by this criminal organization. And, on that group, we got, Comac Vitus and Orla Jareni as Padawans. So we get to see that these two characters have a history together. And the book keeps cutting back and forth between the current day plot on the Amaxian station and the plot 25 years later. And I kept thinking it was going to feed into the main day plot. And either I missed it or it just doesn't. At first, I thought it was going to teach them the lesson of, hey, don't rush, because when you rush things, you make mistakes. And I guess you could say they rushed with the whole Drengir when they undid the force field that the Sith put in place, and it ultimately unleashed the Drengir. Maybe that was them, rushing and causing mistakes. But then I think ultimately what the story was trying to say was that the restrictions of the Jedi Order, the way they do things isn't always the right way, because Orla ends up becoming a way seeker, right? And Comac, he's struggling with, the death of his master on that mission 25 years ago, but also the restraints of the Jedi Council and how they want him to operate within the Order, and how maybe thinking outside the box could be more beneficial. Because when they went to save those royals, they had to play things by the book, and things may or may not have gone according to plan. But had they used different tactics, maybe a little bit unsavory tactics, things may have been different. So I don't know. I just didn't get what I wanted from those flashbacks, and wasn't really a big fan of them. At the end of the day, I felt like they could have been left out. Whatever, right? So with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and give Star Wars: The High Republic, Into the Dark, a 4 out of 5. I thought the characters were enjoyable. I enjoyed the setting. Set up the Drengir. They're pretty interesting, but hopefully, like I said, they get fleshed out further. 4 to 5. Definitely the best book thus far. Until next time, I'll see you there.